Hi everyone, welcome to our day one training session of learning Oracle Goldengate Microservices Architecture training. My name is Ashish Agarwal, and I'll be delivering this lecture to you. So before commencing the session, just a quick round of update regarding my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Ashish Agarwal _GG. So if you haven't visited the channel, I would request you to do visit the channel and do like, share, and subscribe the channel. The channel is dedicated to Golden Gate related videos. Thank you. So the training is about Oracle Goldengate 21C microservices architecture. So microservices architecture. So during this training, we are going to learn about what is Goldengate, how it works in microservices architecture, what is microservices architecture, and how it differs from different architecture like classic architecture. So just a quick introduction about me. Like I'm expert in Oracle Goldengate and Oracle database. I have 16 plus years of training experience in Goldengate, various high rated courses available. Like apart from microservices, I have classic architecture and Veridata. I have trained more than 5,800 plus individuals and taken 260 plus corporate batches. This I have not updated, so you find the older statistics. And I'm Oracle Goldengate certified and Oracle certified professional. I'm blogger and speaker on Oracle Goldengate. So you can always reach out to me on my email for any question queries you have. So my email ID is ashishagarwaleg@gmail.com. You can always tweet your queries to me at ashishagarwaleg, and you can always send me your message or comment at my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ashishagarwal _GG. So the agenda of this training includes overview and introduction to Oracle Goldengate Microservices, download and installation of Goldengate Microservices. So as the case with all our trainings, this training also starts from basics and it also covers the advanced level. So I start with download and installation of Goldengate Microservices and how it differs from classic. We discuss about configuration of Goldengate in microservices architecture, how we do configuration. Then we discuss about setting up replication in Goldengate microservices architecture. Then we'll be discussing about 21C Goldengate new features, configuration of parameter files in Goldengate MSA. So parameter files are one of the critical files. So how do you configure parameter files in microservices architecture? We'll be discussing about that. Then performance matrix server, which is a new feature which was introduced from Goldengate microservices. So how it differs from classic. So we'll be discussing about performance matrix server, then different components of microservices architecture like service manager, administration server, distribution server, receiver server, admin client. What is admin client? So in classic architecture, you have GGSCI. In microservices, how do you configure? So is microservices everything about GUI? No, you have got command prompt as well, and which is called as admin client. Then what is the difference between classic architecture and microservices? Then we'll be discussing about how to upgrade our classic architecture to microservices architecture. What would be the steps? Deinstallation. Then we'll be discussing about upgradation of one Goldengate version to another version. Bidirectional replication, DDL replication. We'll be discussing about that as well in the training. So the day one agenda include. So today is day one training. So we'll keep it like we'll do overview and introduction to Oracle Goldengate microservices architecture. What are different Oracle Goldengate architectures available? And then if time permits, we'll also discuss about download and installation of Goldengate microservices architecture. So first of all, let us start with Oracle database architecture. So Goldengate is a product which is called as change data capture tool. So CDC. So Goldengate is a CDC tool. CDC stands for change data capture tool. That means that whatever changes happens on the source database, those changed data is captured and then it is applied on the target database. So Goldengate is a change data capture tool. So from where does Goldengate captures the changes? It captures the changes from database. Now in database, from where does it capture? So in database, in database, whatever changes happens, they gets returned into the transaction logs of the database. In case of Oracle, these transaction logs are called as redo logs or backup of redo logs, which are called as archive logs. So in case of Oracle database, Goldengate captures the transactions from transaction logs of the database. So again, I repeat, these transaction logs are redo logs or backup of redo logs, which are called as archive logs in case of Oracle database. In case of any non-Oracle database, it is called as transaction logs. Like when we talk about SQL Server or MySQL, these are called as transaction logs. So Goldengate captures the changes which gets written into the transaction logs and then apply them on the target database. So first of all, let us discuss about Oracle database architecture in brief. So Oracle database architecture is divided into two parts. First is SGA and second is basically instance, and second is Oracle database files. So instance is again divided into two parts, SGA and background processes. So SGA includes your library cache, data dictionary cache, database buffer cache, Java pool, redo log buffer, and large pool, to name a few. There are various background processes involved here, like pmon, smon, dbwr, which is also called as database writer, lgwr, which is also known as log writer. Then there is database checkpoint, and then there are other background processes. Then at the Oracle database side, you have got three types of files. One is data file, second is control file, and third is redo log file. So data files are the actual files where the data is stored. So say for example, you do select star from employee table. From where do you get the output from? You get that output from data files. So data files stores the actual data in the database. Then you have got control files. So control files are the metadata files, metadata information. So these control files are the most critical files in database level, which stores the metadata information. So control files are kind of data about data. So if you lose your control file, your database goes on toss. So these control files are really very important. So control files are used for storing the metadata information. And then you have got redo log files. So redo log files are the files which contains the changes, whatever changes are being made to the database. Those changes gets written into redo log files. So remember, these redo log file contains committed as well as uncommitted transaction. It's not like they only contain committed transaction. These redo log files, I again repeat, contains committed as well as uncommitted transactions. Now these redo log files are limited, right? Now, once the backup of redo log file has to be taken, the backup of redo log file is taken on disk and they are called as archive log files. So say for example, you have defined 3 redo log files in your database of each 50 MB each. So once you have 150 MB of changes written into redo log file, so the oldest redo, as I said, you have defined 3 redos in your database. So the oldest redo will be flushed out and will be backed up on OS, which is called as archive log files. So archive log files are backup of redo log files, which contains the changed data. Whatever data gets changed in the database, that changed data gets written into redo log files and then backup of redo log files, which are archive log files. So for Goldengate, these are the files from where Goldengate reads the data from. So it captures the changed data. Whatever data is getting changed into the database, it captures that. Okay, so but the question comes, how does data gets written into these redo log files? So what happens is, say for example, you execute the command select star from dpt11. So you get the data from data file. Now suppose you want to update a data in department table. So you execute the command update department table, set location equal to xyz, where department number equal to 10. So what happens is that information gets written into database buffer cache. Now, whenever you make changes to the buffer, it is called as dirty buffer. It is called as dirty buffer. So dirty buffer is the changed data. So whatever changes you have made, it will be written here. So from here, they will be returned into redo log buffer. From database buffer cache, they will be returned into redo log buffer. And then with help of log writer process, the change data basically. So changes means whenever you do any insert, update, or delete, or any DDL transaction like alter, modify, drop, or any DDL. So these constitutes changes. So whether it is DDL or DML transaction, it gets written into a redo log file. How? From redo log buffer. So from redo log buffer, with help of log writer process, data gets written into redo log files. So whenever there is dirty buffer, it gets written into redo log buffer. Okay, with help of database writer process writes that dirty buffer directly from database buffer cache to data file. But before that, the log writer process writes the dirty buffer from redo log buffer to redo log file. So log writer writes the changes from redo log buffer to redo log file under these conditions, like at commit. Whenever there is commit, the data from redo log buffer gets returned to redo log file, or when redo log buffer is 1/3 full, every 3 seconds, but before database writer process can write the data to the data files. So data file contains the actual changes. Now you may ask the question, why do we need this redo log file? What is the purpose of writing the data to redo log file if the data is directly getting returned into the data file? Anyone would like to answer this? You got my question, right? My question is, if I told you that the copy of the dirty buffer gets written into redo log buffer, but database writer writes that data from database buffer to data file as well. So what is the purpose of these redo log files?
Recovery purpose.
Exactly, for recovery purpose. Now suppose, consider, I'll give you one example for it. Right now, you have bank account in Bank of America, consider. Right now you have got $5,000 into your account. Okay. Now you went to bank, you deposited $1,000 into your account. Okay. Now the teller who was sitting, she took your money and she took your money. So the updated balance should be $6,000, right? But before the balance could, and you left the bank after depositing thinking that it will be updated, right? But before the amount could be updated. So basically what happened was the teller, she updated the amount, she deposited the amount in your account. So the update at her end, at the front end, basically what happened was the amount was updated to 6,000 at the database level. Before that information could be returned into this data file, that means that the updated amount in your bank account becomes $6,000. Your database got crashed. Your database is crashed. So when your database comes up, so right now when the database was crashed, the amount in your bank account still shows 5,000. But when it comes up, it should show 6,000, right? How will it show 6,000? How will it know that you have $6,000 in your account from these redo log files? So what happened was, from the front end, when the teller did did accept your money, okay, what happened was, at the database level, from redo log buffer, data was returned to the redo log file. But before it could be returned into the data files, the database got crashed. So during the startup of the process, you will use the database will use the redo log file to recover, redo log file or archive log file to recover your lost data, so that the updated balance will be shown correctly to $6,000. So the purpose of redo log files is for recovery purpose. But now these Goldengate or any change data capture tool. So there are different competitors of Goldengate available in the market. Not only Goldengate is the change data capture tool, there are different change data capture tool available in the market, right? So each change data capture tool basically uses the transaction logs, which are called as, in case of Oracle, which are called as redo logs, or backup of redo logs, which are called as archive logs. So they uses these redo log files to capture the changes from the database. So how does these redo log file gets the changes? They gets the changes from redo log buffer with help of log writer background process. Okay. So Goldengate, just to give you a brief overview, Goldengate was founded in 1995 and it was Goldengate at that time. In 2009, it became Oracle Goldengate. So Oracle overtook it in 2009, and since then it is known as Oracle Goldengate. It is named after famous San Francisco Golden Gate. Now, during this training, we have been discussing about this is microservices architecture training. So what is microservices architecture? What are different types of Goldengate architectures available? Let us discuss about that. So there are two types of Goldengate architecture available. One is classic architecture and second is microservices architecture. So classic architecture is there since beginning. Microservices architecture was introduced in Goldengate version 12.3 onwards in 2017. So Oracle Goldengate classic architecture is command prompt based GGSCI based architecture. So from 2009 to 2017, there was only one way to configure Goldengate, that was through GGSCI. Until 2017, it was called as Oracle Goldengate. In 2017, Oracle renamed it to Oracle Goldengate Classic Architecture. And then in 2017, they launched new architecture of Goldengate, which is called as Oracle Goldengate Microservices Architecture. Okay, so classic architecture allows you to do setup, troubleshooting, performance tuning, management, everything through command prompt GGSA. Microservices architecture is available from Goldengate version 12.3. It allows you to set up, manage, troubleshoot, configure Goldengate through GUI as well. So this microservices architecture allows you to set up, manage, troubleshoot, configure Goldengate through GUI and allows for better integration with cloud applications as well. Now, another important thing for you to know is until Goldengate version 19C, microservices architecture was available only for Oracle databases. That means for non-Oracle databases until 19C, you had to go with classic. From 19C, support for Goldengate microservices has been extended to 5 databases, non-Oracle databases, which is MySQL, DB2, SQL Server, and Postgres database. And Oracle is already there. So post 19C, I should say. So basically from 19C, support for OGG microservices architecture is extended for 5 databases, which includes MySQL, DB2, SQL Server, and Postgres. So if you are using Goldengate version 18C, you can only use microservices for Oracle databases. Remember, Goldengate binaries are separate for each database and each platform. So the binaries for Goldengate classic architecture will be different than Goldengate microservices. Similarly, binaries for DB2 database will be different than Oracle. Or you'll see, and we'll be discussing. Same way, binaries for each platform will be different as well. Like for Linux, it will be different. For Sun Solaris, it will be different. For Windows, it will be different. Okay. So just for your information so that you understand it better. So another important thing is, just to let you know, 21C is the last version where Classic is available. So post 21C, that means from 23C onwards, Classic architecture will be deprecated. That means no new version or feature will be introduced for Classic architecture. It will all be microservices. But still, if you go out into the market, as per the statistics released by Oracle, 78 to 80% of implementations are still on Classic architecture. Microservices is being used by 20 to 22%. But yeah, now all the implementations, whatever are going on, Oracle is promoting this microservices architecture aggressively, and there are plans to take it to 40 to 50% in near future for microservices. In fact, the main step towards introducing of microservices or getting microservices architecture everywhere is introducing Goldengate microservices from non-Oracle popular databases as well. Okay. Then just to complete the Goldengate family, there is one more product in Goldengate family which is called as Veridata. So Veridata is another product in Goldengate family which allows you to verify the data. So say for example, on source object, you have got 10,000 records. On target, you have got 9,000 records. So what Veridata can do for you is it can identify the discrepant records for you and it can repair those discrepancies as well for you. Okay. So Veridata nowadays is getting very popular due to these cloud migrations going on. So upon migration, you want to confirm whether your data is in sync or not. You can run the Veridata job and it will give you the result. So basically, Veridata, as the name suggests, it verifies the data for you. So it's a data verification tool which identifies the data discrepancies between two objects. And if you want any discrepancy, if you have find, it can repair those as well for you. So that is the major advantage with Veridata. Okay. Now, one of the common questions which are being asked is, with the introduction of microservices, does integrated no longer exist? Anyone has this question? Okay. With introduction of microservices, integrated no longer exists? What do you think?
Yes, integrated is exists as of now in 23C.
But why don't we see integrated over here? Okay. So I see a lot of responses. Okay. So now there are different types of extracts and replicates, right? So integrated is type of extract and replicate. Okay. So what people get confused is, so you have to understand one thing. Under classic architecture, you configure Goldengate extract and replicate. Under microservices architecture, you configure Goldengate extract and replicate. So classic architecture and microservices architecture basically represents complete architecture. Under that, you configure different types of Goldengate processes like extracts and replicates. So there are two types of extracts available. One is integrated extract and second is classic extract. The reason why people get confused is, what happened was, just like initially when Goldengate was launched, there was only one architecture. So it was called as Oracle Goldengate. When microservices was launched, they renamed it to classic architecture. So classic means traditional one. Same way, when Goldengate was launched, there were only two types. There was only one type of extract and one type of replicate, which was called as Goldengate extract and Goldengate replicate. Now, what happened was Goldengate evolved itself and they launched a new type of extract and different types of replicate. So what happened was the existing extract, which is there since beginning, was renamed to classic. So the confusion why it comes is because of this classic term, which exists both in architecture as well as type of extract. But you have to understand one thing: classic is nothing but traditional one. By classic here, if I have to justify Oracle's naming convention, I would say that classic means it's the traditional one or the first one which was there when Goldengate was introduced. So there are two types of extracts. One is integrated extract and second is classic extract. So integrated extract is available from Goldengate version 11.04 and database version 11.03. Remember, integrated extract is available only for Oracle database. For non-Oracle database, integrated extract is not available. You can configure classic extract for that. Okay. Now there are different types of replicates like non-integrated or classic replicate. Integrated replicate, which was introduced from Goldengate version 12.1 and database 12c. Coordinated replicate, which was introduced in 12.2, and then the parallel replicate is the latest feature which has been introduced in Goldengate version 12.3 onwards. So there are two types of parallel replicate. One is parallel non-integrated replicate and second is parallel integrated replicate. So to configure parallel non-integrated replicate, the database version should be 12.1 and minimum Goldengate version should be 12.3. For configuring the parallel integrated replicate, the database version minimum should be 12.2 and Goldengate version should be 12.3. So the question comes, which one should we choose to configure? So the answer to that question is this integrated extract. Now, if you are using multi-tenant architecture in your environment, you can only use integrated. For multi-tenant architecture, classic extract is no longer supported. For replicates, all types of replicates are supported, whether it is multi-tenant or non-multi-tenant. But the recommendation always is to go with the latest one. So either go with integrated or parallel replicate. If parallel replicate is supported, go with parallel replicate. The major difference between integrated and classic extract is performance-wise. The performance difference. The performance of integrated extract is almost 5 times faster than the traditional classic one. Same way, this replicate as well. So the performance wise, these newer replicates are much better. We'll be discussing about these when we do the configuration. So let us quickly discuss about classic architecture and then we'll move to microservices. So classic architecture is available since beginning of Goldengate. Now you have got source database and target database. So your source database can be any Oracle or any non-Oracle supported database. Same way the target could be any Oracle or non-Oracle supported database. So in classic architecture, what happens is you configure Goldengate extract process. So remember one thing, the capture process is also called as extract process. So whenever during the training, whenever we are referring extract, it means capture. Okay. And when we are referring to delivery, it also means replicate. So capture and extract are used interchangeably. Same way, the replicate and delivery, these terms are used interchangeably. Okay. So what you do is you configure Goldengate extract process. So in the previous screen or previous slide, you saw different types of extracts and replicate. So some of you might have that question, what is extract and what is replicate, right? So now this will answer. So what happens is you configure Goldengate extract process on the source database. You configure Goldengate extract process on source database, which reads the transaction from the transaction logs. Now remember one thing I told you, the transaction logs of the database contains committed as well as uncommitted transactions. But remember, Golden Gate captures only committed transaction. The extract process will capture only committed transactions. It won't capture any uncommitted transaction. Okay. So Golden Gate extract process reads the data from the transaction logs and captures the committed transactions. Once the transaction gets committed, it writes them to the trail file on local machine, which are known as local trail file. Now these trail file resides on operating system. They consume space on your operating system. So extract process extracts the data, write to local trail. Now once the data becomes available into local trail, the data pump process reads the data from local trail, sends it over TCP/IP network and writes it to remote trail on target. There is one collector process here which runs in the background. So what happens is pump process sends the data over TCP/IP network, collector process collects it. You don't see this collector process because it's a background process. It runs over here. So pump process sends the data upon reading the local trail, send it over TCP/IP network where collector process on target collects it and then writes it to remote trail file. The trail file on source system are called as local trail file. The trail files on target system are called as remote trail file. So the pump process reads the data from local trail, sends it over TCP/IP network and writes it to remote trail. Once the data becomes available into remote trail, the Golden Gate replicate process reads the data from the remote trail and apply it to target database. So there are three processes involved in Golden Gate replication: extract, pump, and replicate. Extract, pump, and replicate, which does the replication for you. Okay. So each process here has a source to read from and a target to write to. So capture process source is transaction logs of source and target is local trail. Pump process source is local trail and target is remote trail. The replicate process source is remote trail and target is target database. So this Golden Gate also supports your bidirectional replication. So what does bidirectional means? Bidirectional means is both the sites are live. So whatever transactions happens on site A, they will be replicated to site B. Similarly, whatever transactions are done by application on site B, they will be replicated to site A database. So now in bidirectional, I always say one thing: bidirectional is nothing but two-way unidirectional. So just like you are configuring unidirectional replication from site A to site B, similarly do unidirectional configuration from site B to site A, but with some consideration. So those consideration we discussed during the training, but bidirectional is nothing but two-way unidirectional with some consideration. So here also you will have extract process capturing data from site B and writing to local trail. Once the data becomes available into local trail, data will be data pump process configured over here will write it to remote trail on site A. And once the data becomes available into remote trail, the replicate process on site A will apply the data to site A database. Okay. So this is how your classic architecture works. So here everything runs as a process. Capture, pump, replicate, all processes runs. Microservices, you must be hearing the term microservices in lot of technologies as well, like ServiceNow. It has upgraded to microservices. So what is microservices? Microservices basically is future of Golden Gate. Same thing Golden Gate has done. Upon introducing microservices, Golden Gate has basically evolved itself, and with future, it is now the future of Golden Gate now looks really very good. So with microservices, what happens is things runs as a service here. So there are different services involved in microservices. So Oracle Goldengate Microservices is a new REST API based architecture which enable us to configure, monitor, and manage Oracle Goldengate services using web-based user interface. So remember one thing, guys, let me make it clear. For microservices, GUI is one of the feature. There are so many other features which you'll be learning with this training. But yeah, GUI is one of the feature. But another thing let me tell you is, for people like me, I still trust instead of GUI, I prefer the traditional way of using command prompt. So same thing with microservices. It not only has GUI, it has command prompt as well. Just for your information, I'm telling. So Oracle Goldengate 12c R3 introduces the concept of microservices architecture. So in August 2017, Oracle released two architecture. Classic architecture. So basically the older architecture was there. They just renamed it to classic architecture. And they launched a new architecture, which is called as microservices architecture. Now, if you want to upgrade to new microservices architecture, you have to do a fresh install and migrate to the architecture. So if you want to migrate to a new microservices architecture, say for example, right now you have classic, you want to upgrade to microservices, you will have to do out of place upgrade. So you will have to do a fresh install and migrate to the architecture. I was hearing that there is some utility available. I'm not sure, or I haven't checked it or tested it yet. There is some utility as well available which can upgrade your existing classic to microservices, but I won't comment on that because I haven't tested or tried it yet. But as per my understanding, or whatever steps I follow as of today, I do a fresh installation of microservices and then migrate the existing process to the new microservices architecture. So in microservices architecture, you have got four services, basically four services which run. These are administration service, distribution service, performance metric service, as well as receiver service. Okay. Now, there are four services which runs in microservices. Now, to manage these four services, you have got a service manager. So service manager basically is watchdog for all these services which you see. So you have when you install Goldengate, you have to configure service manager. Under service manager, you configure, like you define your administration server, distribution server, performance metric server, as well as receiver server. So remember one thing, in classic architecture, you have data pump. In microservices, there is no data pump. The classic architecture data pump process has been replaced with distribution server in microservices architecture. Same way I told you about collector process in classic architecture. Remember one thing, the classic architecture of the collector process of classic architecture has been replaced with receiver server in microservices architecture. So there is no data pump or receiver server in microservices. I again repeat, the classic data pump has been replaced with distribution server in microservices. Same way, classic collector process has been replaced with receiver server in microservices architecture. And then you have got new performance metric server introduced in Goldengate, which is also available in classic architecture as well. But microservices, it is more advanced and more features are there. Now, another thing is, in microservices, where do you configure Goldengate processes? Like we saw extract, replicate. The concept still remains same. Just to let you know, in classic and microservices, the concept still remains same. Like extract captures the data, writes to local trail, distribution server sends the data over TCP/IP network where receiver server receives it, and then replicate process applies it to target database. But now the extract and replicate processes are defined under administration server. So under administration server, you will be defining your extract and replicate processes. Okay. So this is how your microservices architecture looks like. So in microservices architecture, you have got an administration server. Under administration server, you will, so you have, first of all, you have got service manager. Okay. Under service manager, you will define your administration server. Okay. Under administration server on source, you will configure Goldengate extract process, which will write data to operating system, and those files are called as local trail files. Once the data becomes available into local trail, distribution server sends the data over TCP/IP network, where receiver server on target receives it and writes it to remote trail. Once the data becomes available into remote trail, the replicate process reads the data out of your remote trail and apply it to target database. So I again repeat, under administration server, you configure Goldengate extract process, which writes the data to local trail. Distribution server runs on the source system. It reads the data from local trail, sends it over TCP/IP network, where receiver server running on target receives it. Once the data becomes available, once the data is received by receiver server on target, that local trail file, the data will be returned into local trail file. And once the data is available into local trail file, on target administration server, you configure the replicate process. So this replicate process reads the data from remote trail and apply it to target database. So if you see, service manager basically is managing all the services. So performance matrix server you can run on both the sides. Like each instance has performance matrix server, so it monitor the Goldengate performance in your environment. Okay. So this is how you configure. So we'll be discussing about downloading, installing Goldengate microservices, setting up Goldengate in microservices environment. We'll be discussing all about that. Any question if you have, you can ask. So Anil has a question, why REST API? So REST API, basically what happens in microservices architecture when we do the setup, the REST API call is being made. So you can see REST API logs and everything being written on the server. So say for example, you from GUI, you do stop extract. So what happens is a REST API call is being made. Through that REST API call, the extract gets stopped or started. So it's a REST API based architecture. Okay. Okay, there is a question, which type of extract or replicate we should choose and on what basis to decide. I always answer it in one simple way. To decide on which type of extract and or replicate you have to use, always go with the latest supported one. Like say for example, if integrated extract is supported, go with integrated one without any choice. Don't think about that twice. Because integrated extract, say for example, it has so many features, and along with that, I'll tell you, as per my testing as well, it is almost 5 times faster than its contemporary extract. Same applies to replicate. The latest replicate is parallel replicate, and if it supports parallel integrated replicate, go with parallel integrated. Okay. Any other question from anyone? Okay, so what is performance matrix server? So we'll be discussing about that in detail once we configure. So this performance matrix server monitors the Goldengate performance in near real, means real time. You can monitor like how much CPU it is consuming, how much CPU load is there, how much database load is there through that performance matrix server. It shows you graphical interface in microservices. In classic architecture, it is a bit different. Okay. Are all these services automatically enabled? So the answer to that question is when you do installation, you will get the answer to it. So during installation, they are not automatically enabled. You can choose what you want to enable. So it is very good question. Okay, so you can pick and choose which service you want to enable. We'll see during the installation part. What is REST API? So REST API is basically API stands for application program interface. You must have heard web API, right? So what it does is basically it does the transfer of the data. So you can, like, if you want to read about REST API, it is RESTful API. You can Google out. So it's internal, like it makes the call and the output is returned basically in that case. So it's a web service, basically you can consider. So this is how the configuration, or this is how microservices is defined as well. Okay. The MSA is higher cost license than classic. Okay. So the answer to this question is as so before I answer this, there is a disclaimer. Let me read that out. Any licensing question I'm answering here, it based on my knowledge or discussion with Oracle. But any cost or anything related to it, because the product is owned by Oracle, I can give you the technical answer, definitely. But this is something related to finance, which is related to Oracle. But as per my understanding or discussion with Oracle, if you buy a Goldengate license, you don't have to choose, like you can pick and choose whatever architecture you want to install. So classic and microservices doesn't have separate cost as per my understanding. But I would always suggest check with your account manager, Oracle account manager, for more details on that. Okay. There's a question in microservices architecture. Do we have unidirectional and bidirectional? See, you have to understand one thing here. Bidirectional, unidirectional are the type of configuration. We have to understand one thing. There are two types of architecture. One is classic, second is microservices. So whatever is supported by classic, microservices also supports. There is no difference between classic and microservice. It's just that Oracle has launched a new architecture of Goldengate. So if I talk about 21C, whatever capabilities classic architecture has for Oracle, same capabilities microservices has for Oracle. Whatever capabilities classic has for SQL Server, same capabilities your microservices has for SQL Server. So configuration, setup, troubleshooting, everything remains same. So if your question is microservices, does microservices supports classic and unidirectional and bidirectional? I'll ask you a question. Does classic architecture supports it? Yes. So microservices also support. So whatever classic architecture supports, microservices also supports. So is service manager in microservices same as manager in classic? Okay. So another important thing here, guys, is the microservices classic architecture. In microservices, you no longer have in classic architecture, you have got manager process. In microservices, you have got service manager. So service manager basically is watchdog for all the services like administration server, performance metric server, distribution server, or receiver server. So the purpose of service manager is completely different to classic manager. Okay. So there is a question from Francisco. Is classic architecture covered in this course? So this training, like this weekday batch, what we are running, it is for microservices. So we'll be covering microservices. Classic architecture is a separate batch, which is going to start from upcoming weekend. And this course covers troubleshooting, performance tuning, everything in detail. Okay. Another important thing is, yes, GGSCI. What GGSCI is in classic architecture, in microservices, you have got admin client. So in classic architecture, you have got GGSCI, you do all the configuration from GGSCI. Microservices, you have got admin client, which is command prompt of Goldengate in microservices architecture. One of my client disabled the metric server. Is this part of the license cost? I don't think so, no. To use the advanced feature, there may be, but no. As per my understanding, there is no licensing cost. But again, if there is any licensing question, because see, another important thing I like to tell you about this licensing part is each customer is treated differently by Oracle. So it might be possible that based on my client, whoever client I have worked with, the relationship might state that they'll use performance matrix server with Goldengate license. But if performance matrix server is separate license as per your client, like it depends, right? How much you pay, you get that much service. So it is possible what amount they are paying, what type of service they are getting. So things depends on that as well. But as per my understanding, if you ask me, no, performance matrix server doesn't require any separate license. Okay. Okay. So we'll be continuing tomorrow, same timing. So the day 2 session will be continuing tomorrow. Okay. And it's a day 2 live training session. The timing remains same. So we are going to discuss about download of Goldengate microservices in the next session. So we'll be starting with how to download, how to do installation, how to create service manager in microservices, how to create deployments. So what are service manager deployments? So just to give you a heads up, service manager, and so these services you see, right? Administration, performance metrics server, distribution server, and receiver server, they form a deployment in microservices. We'll be discussing more on that tomorrow in the next session. Then we'll see how to log into service manager, different services part of service manager. And then if time permits, we'll create the credential store and directory structures. We'll see directory structure difference between classic and microservices. So the step to do prior to the session is set up the lab and download Goldengate Microservices Architecture in virtual box. So we'll be continuing tomorrow, same timing. Okay.
We download the.
So if I have to quickly recap what we discussed today is in session 1 of Oracle Goldengate Microservices Architecture training, we discuss about below. First, we discuss about different types of architecture like classic and microservices. Then we discuss briefly about classic architecture. And then we discuss about how process data flow in classic architecture. Then we got introduced to microservices architecture. Microservices architecture is available from 2017. And then we saw there are different components of microservices architecture like service manager, administration server, distribution server, receiver server, and performance matrix server. We also discussed that data pump process of classic architecture has been replaced with distribution server in microservices architecture. And the collector process of classic architecture has been replaced with receiver server in microservices architecture. Okay. Thank you.